Okay, so let's jump into the Book of Life. I understand that this is a weird book to start on because it's the end of a trilogy. But this idea for the Parent's Guide, it hit me while I was finishing up this series, so there's not much I can do about that. And actually, in a way, I feel like this is helpful. If you are interested in this series, most of like the content within it, the adult content, it stays at the same level pretty much the whole time. So I think the only thing that really picked up in this book is probably, I would say maybe the violence and then the kind of frightening or intense scenes. And I want to say some of the triggers. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to flash some of just the bare bone details up here. Please feel free to pause the video, take a screenshot if you want, I don't care. I just want you to get the information as fast as you want it, and then I'll give my commentary afterwards. Okay, so getting into it, obviously the language is explicit, and something interesting that I have found, and I think that you will find this if you look for it, usually you can tell how explicit it's going to be based off of which characters are talking. Most characters don't have the same level of profanity. It's very much dependent on who's speaking. And then also there's also some foreign curse words, I guess, and I thought to include them, but it's funny because for me it's not a big deal because they don't register as swear words. And then frightening and intense scenes. So this one's kind of weird, and this is where we'll probably get into some of our first trigger warnings in case you missed the ones at the beginning. But frightening or intense, it's mostly moderate. There's not a whole lot of graphic detail, but they do have some situations, or they briefly cover some situations that are disturbing. But yeah, for trigger warnings, there is sexual assault. There's mentions of rape. There's kidnapping and a woman being held prisoner, and there's child murder and death, which was honestly really shocking to me and kind of heartbreaking. And I think one of my big problems with especially like the child murder and abuse and all that, it felt very much like sorry about that, I got a text. It felt very much like the author was going for shock value, and I just, I felt like she wanted me to really hate this character. And, yeah, it works. I definitely hated the character after he did what he did. But at the same time, I'm also kind of mad at the author because it's not necessary at all. It was just really disturbing to read, especially as a parent. So, yeah, I've got the page numbers up for that. But yeah, moderate, but still disturbing. As far as violence and gore goes, I would say that this is moderate. This has been pretty consistent over the course of the entire series. There's nothing too shocking or too out of the ordinary. It's kind of like your regular PG-13 level of things. You got some brothers who fight, and they've got descriptions of broken bones and like, oh, I'm choking you out and whatever. I don't know. It's not too bad. I would kind of rate it as, it's nothing, I don't think it's anything worse than what you would see in most young adult books. So even though that's complicated as a genre. And it's more of a marketing ploy. Sex and nudity. Okay, so this is actually going to fall into that category of, in case you haven't seen the other video, I kind of go into detail about what I'm doing here and why I'm doing this. But anyways, this one, so sex and nudity in this book, it falls into the category of, yes, they describe sex, but it's pretty brief most of the time. Sometimes it kind of gets into some detail where you're like, But don't let me yuck your yum. If that is your thing, you do you. That's just fine. For me, it was just like, really? But I don't know. Anyway. Anyway, you know, you have multiple sex scenes through this book, and honestly, it falls into the category of, yes, it talks about the actual, like, them actually having sex. It does cover the whole event, but at the same time, it's really bland and straightforward and like, and then they were doing it, and you're like, okay. So nothing too shocking there. Oh, the other category, or the trigger warnings that we're here to now. I gotta tell you guys, there's something in here. There's something in this book that was a present theme that just kept popping up, and it was a perfect example for this other category that I just like have to talk to you about. There are repeated and multiple instances where characters encourage a pregnant person to drink. I'm not kidding. So anyways, at the beginning, you have one character that's like, oh, well, here, take a sip of whiskey. And she's like, well, what about my babies? And the other person's just like, it's just a sip to calm your nerves. It won't hurt the baby. First of all, if it's not enough to hurt the babies, which do not drink while you're pregnant, we don't know what the safe amount is, so just assume that it's not. That's like the common advice that you'll get from OBGYNs is, we don't know what amount is safe, so you're better off just avoiding it, right? But it's like, if it's not enough to affect the twins, then what on earth makes you think that it's enough to affect her nerves or affect her anxiety? I just, no. But anyways, so she accepts it. She takes the drink. And then there are multiple instances where it comes up where it's like, oh, well, here, have a drink. And, oh, it's fine. We did it historically. You're just fine. And on this page, there's this instance where, the mother is now nursing her babies, and that's great, fine. And they talk about like, oh, the husband, offers her a glass of wine and is like, oh, well, if you just wait a few hours before nursing, you'll be just fine. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but the way that it was written sounded very much like advice. Do not under any circumstances use fantasy books as a replacement for advice from your OBGYN. Listen to your doctor, talk to your doctor, and take it seriously, because this woman, she might know a whole lot about history and all sorts of crap like that, but she doesn't know medicine. She's not a doctor. She's not certified in any way. Do not listen to this woman's advice. Okay? Enjoy her work, but take it as fiction. Okay. Rant over. Kind of final thoughts. If this were a movie, I would honestly just rate it as PG-13. I think the entire series I would put as PG-13. I feel like this would be a pretty easy transition from young adult into more of the adult realm. It's nothing too shocking, nothing too upsetting. Like I said, nothing gets too graphic in this book. But at the same time, if you had some pre-existing trauma surrounding child death, child murder, or sexual assault, then, be forewarned, those things do appear here. One final warning one final thought that I have that I'll just leave you with, though, is if you're going to read this book, you know, I think if you like dark academia or light academia, the, you know, academia in general, you know, this book might be a good fit for you. The only issue is that sometimes it comes across really aggressively and to the point where it's almost obnoxious and like it gets in the way of the story. Oh, and another like weird thing I just barely thought of, a lot of action happens off scene, especially at the end. Like there's some big events that happen and you're like, oh cool, I can't wait to read this. And then you flip the page and it's like, she skips it. So just be aware that that's a thing. But yeah, overall, very moderate, nothing too shocking except for those trigger warnings. So happy reading.